Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
We're doing Green Arrow. Let's go already!
We're doing Arrow. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Oliver Queen.
He's not Oliver Queen. This is Ev. And as you can probably tell from the exuberant amount of enthusiasm he has coming through his voice right now, he's very excited to be talking about Season 1 and 2 of CW's television series, Arrow.
And more importantly, Green Arrow, who it's based on, who is my favorite superhero of all time. Don't at me.
Okay. Shall we move into just sort of a general overview of Season 1 and 2 of Arrow, perhaps?
Yeah, let's get this out of the way.
Yeah, let's keep this brief. All right, so...
Arrow is the show about Oliver Queen, a billionaire playboy.
Not a philanthropist.
Not a philanthropist, no.
Yeah.
Just billionaire playboy from a rich, very upper-class family who goes on a boat with his dad and his girlfriend's sister. Boat sinks. Oliver Queen ends up on an island for 5 years, has to survive, comes back, he's changed. Everyone else still sees him as about the same, but now he wears a hood at night and goes around fighting criminals and the 1%ers. It's basically Batman,
Yeah.
but better.
We're kind of sidestepping around this a little bit, but yeah, so just the general consensus of Arrow is essentially, fancy playboy gets lost on an island for 5 years, a lot of stuff happens on that island, he comes back and becomes a vigilante, and then moves on from there. Following on from Season 1 and 2, we discover not only elements of what happened to him on that island in that time through subsequent flashbacks that always take place throughout both seasons, but also all the mysteries wrapped up in not only Starling City, but also his family as well. So, yeah, that's the general consensus. It's like a lot of comic book origins. It's just got the basis as like a universal story of man trapped in wilderness, becomes better, comes back, tries to make city better kind of thing. Yeah, fairly straightforward and very, very similar to Batman. And I guarantee that's not the last time I'm going to be saying that on this podcast, especially in relation to Season 1. Speaking about that, do we want to move into what exactly we think about Season 1 and 2 of Arrow? We should also specify we're only talking about Season 1 or 2 for now. Seasons 3 onwards will be discussed in subsequent episodes.
Yes, we're doing a 3-part trilogy of episodes at the moment. So yes.
Of varying quality. Not only in seasons, but probably in podcast.
Because, as you know, the show's currently just finished its 7th season. So there's a lot going on. So we are going to try and focus on the 2 seasons at a time, up from 1 till 6. Just to try and make some sense of it. And in order to do that, we'll probably be talking not about individual episodes or anything, but just over arcs and the characters and everything that's sort of consistent across the board.
Yeah, of course. Like, this podcast doesn't want to go for 24 hours or something like that. If we really wanted to touch on absolutely every single comic book reference in every episodes and both seasons and so on, it's way too much. So we're going to be hitting the big points in 2 season gaps, basically.
Yes. So this episode, Season 1 and 2. So, Season 1. Season 1 is basically our first introduction to Oliver Queen and a brief rundown of the plot. He comes back. He is now more of a dark, emotionless murderer in a way, but trying to keep that hidden and dealing with a list that his father gave him just before his father died of all people in the city who have failed it and must atone for the sins of his father now by crossing off names, by making them give up their money or pay back all the dastardly things they've done to the underprivileged of the city. Yeah. Very Robin Hood.
Yeah, essentially a brutal liberal Robin Hood.
With a murderous streak.
Yeah.
And in doing so, he discovers a plot to destroy the Glades, which is the lower socioeconomic area of Starling City, all being led by the very sinister Malcolm Merlyn.
Played by the very non-sinister John Barrowman, which I'm sure we'll get into. Yeah. So yes. What are your general thoughts talking about Season 1? Put yourself back so many years since it came out. we're a huge fan of Green Arrow you are. This is the first, like, sort of silver screen adaptation of Green Arrow we've ever really seen, and you get 24 episodes to start you off in season 1. What did you think?
It was intense, and not just because I watched all of it in the span of about 2 days.
Okay. So you didn't watch it as it came out, you watched it?
No, I didn't actually, weirdly enough, didn't know a whole lot about it until I saw the DVD out on JB Hi-Fi just as it sort of was released on DVD. And like, how did I not know about the superhero that I love has got a TV show now?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So I sat down and watched it and got it done in 2 days. And yeah, it's very good, but it's not Green Arrow.
Okay.
Which is kind of the point of the show. He's not going to be Green Arrow. The original plan, he wasn't going to be the Green Arrow until the end of season 5. Of course, plans changed, but even now, you can see in the first season, he's just known as the Hood, and he's sort of growing. I did quite enjoy it, even if there were some parts about him that were very polar opposite to the many different Green Arrow incarnations we've seen, both in comics and in cartoons and various other mediums.
Yeah, okay. Would you say that your, like, love and appreciation for the original character improved or kind of harmed your appreciation of the first season, considering how different it very much is?
Well, with comics, you probably feel this as well. You try and distance yourself a little bit because every story is going to be different. It's going to have different writers. And even in the comics, where it's technically the same continuity, themes and ideas flux all the time.
Yeah, like writers come in and out and so on and so forth. So like characters can shift even if they are technically the same character. Yeah.
So yeah, I try to come in with an open mind, and I feel my knowledge helped more just because I could pick up on all the little subtle clues and things. Like in the very first episode, they show a Deathstroke mask with an arrow stuck through his eye.
I remember that promo image, yeah.
Yes, and so and they don't really bring that up until like a bunch of episodes later. And even then, the character of Deathstroke doesn't actually appear until season 2. Getting ahead of myself here. But it's those little things I feel that helped. And although he wasn't Green Arrow yet, even in the show he wasn't Green Arrow, and so I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt.
Sure, okay. Yeah, fair enough. This is actually a really interesting conundrum, considering you are the massive Green Arrow fan, and yet didn't watch it all until season 1 came out, where I am not a massive Green Arrow fan, but I am a huge Batman fan and watched it episode by episode. Now, I actually remember my first introduction for Arrow. I knew when it was coming out. I remember explicitly looking at a couple of the promo images, including the Deathstroke mask you were talking about from the first episode, but then not getting a chance to see it until I was on a trip somewhere, and the first 3 episodes were on a plane. Funnily enough, I'm like, oh yeah, I might as well check this out. And I enjoyed the episodes enough that once I got back home and I had the opportunity, I started basically watching it episode by episode. So yeah, I feel... So there's one thing, because this definitely won't be the last CW show we talk about, especially moving to even subsequent seasons of this. So I need to preface this with the fact, whenever I'm talking about a CW show, there's a show in there that I really like and a show in there that I don't. So I love the superhero crime procedural, like villain of the week, leading up to some sort of serial adversary that'll like come to a climax at the end of the season. And then there's also the CW melodrama side of the show of attractive people having attractive people problems that I don't really care about. So as much as like I enjoy this season, I enjoy Arrow as a whole, there's definitely elements in there that I can kind of do with that. Those are the elements that I go every time, like, you know, Laurel and, you know, Oliver are having a heart-to-heart or something, I go and make a biscuit or whatever else, and then come back when he's shooting someone else again with Arrow. So I need to preface that, but the superhero procedural stuff I generally like in this first season, even if it is fairly grounded, because one thing we're going to get into, especially when we're talking about the influence on this, but it has a very specific allusions and references to Batman Begins and just Nolan basically post Dark Knight, and that it's kind of gritty and it's like superheroes taking themselves seriously and everything's really like raw and accurate to like real worlds, like bones get broken, people get stabbed, everything like that. And it's not until subsequent seasons, which we'll get to later, obviously, that it becomes more comic booky. But I kind of liked the way that it was grounded in that Batman Begins-esque tone in the first season, even if it felt a little bit derivative at times, honestly, which I think, honestly, is its biggest problem in season 1. I don't know if it quite figures out what kind of tone or its own identity until season 2. It really just feels like a little bit of a hodgepodge of things, as much as I enjoy that hodgepodge at the very least. So
I completely understand with that as well. And you brought up the very classic CW attractive people having attractive people problems.
yeah.
I actually didn't mind that
Really?
as much.
I feel like I'm watching a soap opera every other scene.
I do too, but I kind of like that. And I think I've also... You mentioned it's CW, and I love CW because if they have a show, I either absolutely love it, and they give it so many seasons, even if it doesn't rate too well, because they're just desperate. Or I hate it, and I leave it, and I don't have to worry about it.
Oh, sure. So there's no middle ground for you, basically.
No.
It's just, there's good CW shows, and then there's the rest.
Yes, exactly.
sure.
And on a show like this, even though it does have that soap opera, it is broken up with the superhero stuff, so it doesn't feel like it's just dragging on. It does have its problems, as I feel, later seasons, especially when it comes to romance and the way it treats its female characters.
Yeah, which we'll definitely get to in
We'll
later
get to,
episodes.
but I feel for season 1, there was enough to make it interesting, but not too much that it took away from the rest of the show.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I still watched the show, obviously, despite those elements. I not only watched the show, but I watched it episode by episode until I think, season 6 or something like that, when I finally started to pay it off. Not necessarily because I wasn't enjoying the show at that point. It's more just, partly because of the reasons I was a little bit burnt by the show at that point. I just had other things to watch. But I mean, the fact that it kept me in for that long clearly means it was doing something right, as much as I hate melodrama soap opera-ness that very much tends to infect CW shows. So yeah,
absolutely. And I think this might also affect my comic book knowledge of Green Arrow, because despite how much it is quite similar to Batman, one of the defining differences is Batman is almost always alone, whereas Green Arrow almost always is with his Arrow family, that being his girlfriend / wife, Black Canary, or his on-again, off-again sidekick, Arsenal, or Speedy. And in later comics, they introduce characters like Diggle, who came from the show.
Surprise.
And so that sort of drama and the drama between Oliver and Laurel, I could kind of get behind, because I knew Endgame, it would actually be an improvement over the Green Arrow that we're sort of seeing at the beginning.
Sure. So you know that the
That was my initial thoughts on it.
You assumed the inevitable payoff would be worth all of that, basically. Even
absolutely.
if it may not have ended up being the case. Once again, later seasons, we have to stop doing that.
Yeah.
But okay. No, fair enough. I can kind of understand that. And they do a fairly good job in not only this show, but most of the CW shows is very much still having that one main protagonist, but it very much also being an ensemble cast at the same time. And I think that's one of the strengths about the first season, and the ensemble cast is genuinely quite good for the most part. Like, especially among the most frequent actors, there's not really a lot of people that I disliked, honestly. So yeah. Do you have anything to add in regards to the performances and such? Like, what do you think of Stephen Amell in the first season? So
I'm gonna say I thought he played it well when he was trying to be when he was playing the Hood, he was doing fantastic.
When he was trying to be someone else, when he was trying to be something else. Sorry, I had to get a reference in there at some point.
Of course.
Yep.
But no, he was very good at playing like that sort of conflicted killer, sort of in the Hood and all the darkness. But when he was trying to be Oliver Queen, the fake Oliver Queen, that was the person he was before Post Island, and also kind of in the flashbacks, I felt it was a little bit more hit and miss. He didn't come into it until season 2. Like you said, when the show found its footing, found its
own personality.
Its own personality, exactly.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
That's when his performance improved a lot. But the character, other performances like Colin Donnell, who played Tommy Merlin, I thought he was fantastic, which is kind of sad given that he did have quite a reduced role after the end of season 1.
That's one way to put it. I'm not sure why we're tiptoeing around it, because we kind of assume anyone listening to this knows what happens. But yeah, he dies at the end of season 1, which I think is actually a fairly effective emotional moment, considering his arc is the the lovable best friend, despite all the drama that they go through the first season. That it kind of, I don't know, it was a nice payoff to that at the very least. And you're right, I do think the actor does quite a good job. So
Yes.
yeah, do we want to move into like talking about specific characters then in regards to the source material?
Let's go for it.
Yeah.
Why don't we start just a bit with Merlin?
Yeah,
while we're
sure.
on the topic?
Yep.
Because he's an interesting case. Because he was
Tommy Merlin, I assume
Tommy
you're talking
Merlin.
about. Yeah.
Yes. Tommy Merlin, the son of Malcolm Merlin and the best friend of Oliver Queen, does not appear in the comics. Sort of.
Okay.
Basically, at the same time as Arrow was in its production, the New 52 was just sort of starting.
Which was DC's relaunch, basically, of a new
Yes.
universe. Yeah.
And they didn't tackle the origin until the show was already sort of been commissioned and in production and had done it. And so they could then introduce the character of Tommy Merlin in the comics based on the rough ideas of the TV shows Tommy Merlin. So you have this character, two different interpretations running it concurrently, invented at essentially the same time.
Which is, frankly, really interesting because it
Yeah.
means the character in both cases isn't necessarily an adaptation. Maybe more so in the comic books than it is in the show, but it's like the Tommy Merlin we're talking about for season 1 was basically invented for the show. And it is, you know, in all essence, his own character, which is interesting. I always find it really interesting, especially in regards to comic book properties, which are always continuing on with story and such, when a different form of media, like a television show or a film, could be so popular and create a really popular character that will subsequently influence the comics back again. Like, probably the most perfect example is Harley Quinn, which was introduced in Batman the Animated Series, but previously hadn't been a character in the comic books. But because she was so popular on the animated series, she was introduced in the comics, and now is, frankly, weirdly enough, one of the most popular Batman-related characters in superherodom, which is weird considering you think about she wasn't even an initial character in the comics. So yeah, it's a lot of, actually that's not really the only time that's happened, has it? Funnily enough, not in Arrow at the very least.
We'll get onto some of the other characters in other episodes that this has sort of happened to, but I find it interesting with Merlin. One of the reasons as well was they wanted to put a red herring in for the reveal of the Dark Archer, because Merlin, the comic book character, is quite well known.
Malcolm Merlin, we're talking about now. Yep.
Sorry, in the comics he's just sort of known as Merlin.
Yeah, Merlin the Magician.
Merlin the Magician, Merlin the Dark Archer. He's got a few names. And so they thought, oh yeah, we'll introduce the character of Tommy Merlin, and people will think that, the comic book fans will think that will become the character. And then, surprise, there's Malcolm Merlin, his father, who's the actual Dark Archer Merlin character. So that's what's happened on the TV show. In the comics, where there's already an established Merlin the Magician, surprise, Tommy Merlin has gone and taken over as the Dark Archer.
Once again, a little bit of that cross-pollination going, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a very different... Sorry, in the comics, New 52 comics as well, Tommy is there when the boat that Oliver Queen is on basically sinks.
Oh, really? So he's actually part of the origin in that respect?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Basically, he in the New 52, very quickly, the origin is, instead of a yacht, Oliver is looking after one of his dad's tankers, and because he doesn't like responsibility, he throws a huge raver on it. That attracts the attention of a bunch of pirates. They basically take everyone on board hostage. Oliver tries to save everyone. He uses one arrow to knock the detonator out of the hand of the main pirate. It goes into the ocean, except on the way down, hits the side of the boat and triggers an explosion that kills everyone on board except Oliver and Tommy.
Oh, yay. That sounds fun.
They then both end up Oliver ends up on an island. Tommy ends up under the care of a bunch of monks and severely burnt and wanting revenge. So yes, that is the altered origin of current series Green Arrow in the comics.
Interesting. There you go. You can, funnily enough about that, you can try to kind of draw parallels with the origin that they show in the show. Not that it's Tommy Merlin that's on there that is supposedly dead and then comes back, but with another character who'll show up in season 2, funnily enough. Save that for later down the line. Another case of actually a really interesting character that was introduced for the show and subsequently showed up in the comics is John Diggle.
Yes. John Diggle, the bodyguard / driver / confidant
Slash
guess.
whatever Oliver wants him to
him
be,
to be, yeah.
honestly. Yeah.
At one point, drug dealer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for those who don't know, John Diggle, as well as same as Tom Merlin, didn't exist in the comics beforehand. He was created purely for the TV show, but people loved him so much they added him into the comics.
And he's actually become a fairly popular character in the
Yeah.
comics now, hasn't he? Yeah.
There's an interesting thing where they brought in. There's a whole thing with the comics. I won't get into it now for Green Arrow, but basically, at one point with the New 52, wasn't going so well. They brought in Andrew Krinsberg, who was one of the co-creators of the show. Brought him on. He introduced a bunch of the characters from the TV show to try and bring the audience back. Those on the TV show didn't like the comics. Those who liked the comics didn't like the characters from the TV show. And it all kind of went to shit. But everyone did seem to love John Diggle. And so he became the one character who was brought in from the TV show specifically to try and boost sales that actually made it through and is now a continued character in the current Rebirth series.
Good on John Diggle.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like. I think he's a pretty good character, honestly. As a really good supporting character. Especially not only in Season 1, but from what I've read in the comics as well. So, yeah, I remember a really interesting tweet hearing about a little while ago when Stephen Amell basically outright said so many characters that they've created for the show have now become such a significant part of the Green Arrow lore that they're always going to be affiliated with the character down the line. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case with all of the characters, including one specifically that we'll get into later. But John Diggle, if any, feels like really the one that will become a staple of basically any Green Arrow stories going forward, which I think is pretty good because I think he kind of deserves it. Like David Ramsey on the show does a really good job, honestly. And the character is used really well. He has a number of really interesting arcs as the seasons go on too. So yeah. No, I think he's really good. If we want to circle back a bit again as well and talk about the main antagonist for season 1.
Yes.
Malcolm
the
Merlin.
other Merlin.
Yeah, the other Merlin. Malcolm Merlin, the Dark Archer, played by John Barrowman in probably his most serious role I've seen him in, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Torchwood gets there a little bit. But...
Oh, yeah, I haven't actually seen Torchwood, so yeah, I'll get around to it one day, as I keep telling myself anyway.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah. But no, John Barrowman as a person, I think, is frankly delightful.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like both of us saw him live, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw him in a TARDIS dress.
I saw him in... I don't remember what it was. It was a weird, sexy version of some other superhero costume. Might have been Wonder Woman. I don't remember. That would honestly...
Is that right?
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, he has the personality of 10 men. It's kind of incredible. Which makes his turn as Malcolm Merlin, I think, really interesting in the fact that I wouldn't say none of that personality shines through, but he's obviously taking the role incredibly seriously. And I think it kind of works. I kind of like him as a villain, to be honest. Yeah.
I really enjoyed him in this season 1. I found he could be real menacing when he wanted to be. And there's one particular scene that I want to bring up when he's playing the tape of his dying wife to Tommy. And he just lets out just a little too much anger. And that gave me chills, that one scene. Where he just ends up yelling at Tommy.
Yeah.
Just briefly before having to restrain himself again.
It's really nice. And I even... See, this is another thing that's kind of constructed for the show, but his whole backstory regarding... For people who need to catch up, essentially, so Malcolm Merlin's whole arc for season 1 is that his wife is killed by a random mugging, and then he basically gets really angry at the city, goes away, trains with the League of Assassins, and then comes back and then decides to destroy the Glades to basically purify Starling City. So the way, like, it's almost like a dark alternative to Oliver when Oliver's going for the 1%. Merlin is basically blaming the lower class and trying to destroy them in the same way Oliver is destroying the rich people on his list. I believe, as far as I'm aware, in doing my research, all of that was essentially created for the show. Like, he's... the Dark Archer is not a sympathetic character, or even, frankly, much of a fleshed out character in the comics from what I can find.
No. A lot of his deal in the comics is sort of being that mysterious and his allegiance to, like, the League of Assassins.
Probably the best way to describe him in the comics. At the very least, he's just one of the members of the League of Assassins in like a larger echelon of characters in many respects. Like he obviously has connections to Green Arrow. Like he's bested him in duels plenty of times before and things like that. But he never had like a really specific emotional and personal connection to the character. He was more just sort of a straightforward like hired gun protagonist in so many respects. But in this, they actually turned him to something honestly a lot more human and a lot more fleshed out than he ever was in the comics. And I think it really works.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things we keep talking about, especially with this first season of Arrow, even though if it isn't slavishly accurate to the comics, a lot of the changes they do make and a lot of the sort of the adaptations they take kind of pays off for the best, I think. And Malcolm Merlyn's probably a good example of that, in that it takes a fairly straightforward antagonist. It's still a popular antagonist. Like, he's been around since, I think it was 1971 he was created, but and turned him into something that not only has a genuine level of pathos and connection to Oliver Queen, but is also like a genuinely emotive character onto himself. Yeah.
And everything they did kept in with the main idea that sort of comes from the comics, is that they are sort of that distinct opposite, where Oliver is doing it for the lower class, trying to be the Robin Hood character. Merlin is just the dark hired gun who's doing it for the money and just hates him because, and the two of them hate each other because they are just polar opposites and they can't seem to ever take the other one out for good.
Yeah, like it's that really classic ideological conflict. And while they obviously adapted into the show, it's still there, and I think it really works.
Yeah. And all the improvements just aided that. So now it's something better than, dare I say, better than what the original was.
Yeah, of course. So,
Whew, that felt weird saying.
hey, it can happen sometimes. Yeah, you know, I mean, a lot of my favorite interpretations of characters tends to be in like other forms of media outside the comics. Not always the case, but I like my favorite version of Spider-Man is the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series.
Okay.
As much as I love the comic books, that's like a perfect distillation of the character. So I really think in so many respects, just new creators coming in and looking at all this mythos and condensing it down can really lead to something improved. So yeah, while we're talking about villains as well, we could briefly, if you want to, just touch on some of the more minor villains this season.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about possibly the main antagonist of the flashbacks in Edward Fires?
Yeah. So what can you tell us about this guy?
So in the show, Edward Fires is the general of this sort of mercenary hunter sort of group that gets paid off by a mysterious figure to basically use the island of Lianu as a base so they can shoot down a commercial airliner.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Which will essentially start World War III.
As you do.
Yeah, it's just something to do. And so trying to kill Oliver because Oliver's there and has seen too much and is basically just trying to stop him, as well as trying to rescue the person who rescued Oliver when he first came to the island in
Shadow's father.
Who is Yafei.
That's right. Yeah.
Who is also a weird character from the comics, but we'll get to that later. So yeah, and Edward Fires in the comics is very much a mercenary for hire. He first came out in Mike Grell's run of the Longbow Hunters.
Great miniseries, actually, if people haven't read it. Yeah.
Do read it. We have a poster drawn by Mike Grell of Green Arrow and Batman that I got signed by him. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, I almost forgot about that. That's super cool.
Yes, that is going up in the office as soon as we get an office.
Down the line.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he sort of, in terms of comics, his role has been expanded, but it's always he's a weapons expert, mercenary for hire, that is basically there to protect the enemies of Green Arrow and Shadow in the comics as well. Or just be an assassin, basically.
Yeah.
So what they've done in the show is they basically just taken that main idea, gave him more power and a whole bunch of underlings.
Yeah. And he's really as much as fleshed out as that kind of suggests, doesn't it?
Yeah, basically.
To be honest, even while prepping for this episode, I completely forgot he existed. Yeah.
Well, he hides behind some of the other minor antagonists of the flashbacks in terms of Wintergreen. Oh, yeah. I vaguely remember the name. He is the first sort of Deathstroke who doesn't get called Deathstroke.
That's right. Yeah.
That fights Slade Wilson.
Yep.
Who, I'll briefly touch on him, given that he's in the comics as well. He is an adaptation in which he was basically just the assistant and partner of Deathstroke. When they were both villains. But in this one, we see the more sympathetic Slade Wilson. Yep. Which I'm very excited to eventually getting to in season 2. Watch him kill Wintergreen before he becomes villain since we don't actually see the two of them really do much.
That feels like one of those things that's just almost lip service in a respect. And that it's not really the character from the comics.
No.
It's more just using a name that people are familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is that link to Deathstroke that has always been there. But
That's
it's
essentially it as well.
sort of minor. Like, they didn't even have him without a mask at any point. He was always in a proto-Deathstroke mask.
Yeah. There's honestly there's kind of a couple of villains throughout season 1 of Arrow that work like that as well. It's a one-off, but I remember it really explicitly because it's a Batman character, but Firefly.
Yes.
I think it's episode 12 or something when they never even call him Firefly or anything. It's just there's a fireman who's burning down like places called Garfield Lins, which is the name of Firefly from the comics, and that's really the only similarity we have to them beyond, like, obviously the fire-related crime.
And the tattoo.
Yeah, and the tattoo. And it's just one of those things, really, that doesn't... I don't know, it's not really accurately adapting the character, because it's not really much of a character. It's really just sort of... It's almost like basic fan service, to be honest.
Bit of an Easter egg.
Yeah, kind of. It's, actually, speaking about this is a good transition to another character probably worth talking about in season 1. But I have some conflicting thoughts about how they manage Count Vertigo in this season as well.
Yeah.
Or just in the series in general. In that it's not Count Vertigo, it's just a kind of a crime boss who sells a drug called Vertigo, which is completely...
And it's called the Count because something related to vampires.
Yeah, because apparently the injections look like bite marks on someone's neck or something like that. Yeah, Count Vertigo in the comics is like... basically European royalty.
He is literally a count.
Yeah. What country is he from? I don't remember.
Latveria.
Yeah.
Oh, no, not Latveria.
What is it? Latvarda.
Latvarda.
Yeah, that's the one. So he comes from European royalty. He has like a device implanted into him to basically maintain his balance because he has some sort of illness. And he discovered that device can make other people feel vertigo and then uses it to commit crimes. So it's not a drug or anything like that. He literally just has a power that allows other people to, feel vertigo. And there's really none of that character shows up in the show outside of the name.
No. And look, we're sort of... The mantle of Count Vertigo does continue in later seasons. Yeah. None of them ever seem to touch on this.
Yeah.
They do...
None of them are really Count Vertigo.
Adjust the character, because it is sort of a... In the show, it's very much just a name that gets associated. But every single time, if anything, they had the Scarecrow in one episode under the name Count Vertigo.
Yeah.
They've had various other...
It's essentially kind of the Scarecrow from Batman Begins, isn't it?
Yeah, basically.
It's another one of those similarities with Batman Begins, beyond like the non-linear structure and the flashbacks, and even the end with like a device, a fancy military device used to destroy cities. Gee, I wonder where I've heard that before. It's just one of those things. I mean, on one level, I can kind of understand it, because a villain like Count Vertigo really wouldn't fit into the tone that Arrow had set up in season 1. Like, having this basically European rich guy who can make, with kind of like the closest thing to a superpower that we would have first seen on that show, really would not have fit at all with like the rest of the assassins and muggers and everything that Green Arrow is taking on. So on that level, it makes sense. I just kind of wish they did more than... I wish they kind of saved him and then used him for a main antagonist in later seasons, because he's considered one of Green Arrow's big baddies, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, he is.
Yeah.
In the Parthenon, he's always sort of coming back as one of the main villains. And you'll see that even with other media. Like, there's a fantastic little DC short.
Oh, yeah, I've seen the one.
They're DC Showcase series. If you haven't seen those, you can find them on YouTube. They are great.
Yeah. They're basically like short films set in the DC universe with different characters.
Basically.
Yeah, they're really cool.
And they do a Green Arrow one where it is revealed that Count Vertigo and Merlin are the main villains of that short. And that, I still feel that short film is probably quintessential Green Arrow.
It kind of feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. So if you want to get an idea of what Green Arrow is like in the comics without having to read, go see DC Showcase Green Arrow.
Yeah, it should be fairly straightforward to find, and well worth your time, honestly. Most of those shorts are really, really good. So,
Ooh, and also very good if you are a fan of Young Justice.
Oh, yeah, true.
It was essentially almost sort of a backdoor pilot for a future season that didn't happen in the idea of one of the characters that they're trying to rescue and the Green Arrow Black Canary relationship that sort of comes through.
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah, I completely forgot about that connection. Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Well, actually, if we're going to maintain the villains one for a little while, there is another major character, not really major character, but worth talking about, and then he kind of recurs throughout the season, which is Deadshot.
Yes.
And unlike most of the other characters we'll talk about, Deadshot is like probably the closest we get to a pseudo comic accurate Deadshot, kind of in the at least in the first season, and that he's basically just a hired gun to kill someone. But in the comics, that's originally what he was.
Yep.
Funnily enough. So hey,
And
comic
even
accurate.
like the things that make him different as villain, they had in the show, and it made sense. Like his
the
wrist-mounted,
the machine guns.
machine guns, they were there, but it made sense. His awesome eye sensor thing that was there also made sense.
Yeah. It's just one of those characters that fit really well into the tone they were going
Yes.
with in season 1, which, I mean, he works. So there is, they do some interesting things with Deadshots in later seasons in that they try to kind of make him more of a sympathetic character with, like, the introduction of his family and stuff, which wasn't originally in the comics, but there has been a bit of a groundswell around Deadshot in the last few years, maybe like 5 or 6 years or something, where Deadshot's become a more like likable and sympathetic character. When he's obviously a bad guy and he's killing people, but he's sending all the money back to his daughter and things like that. Like that's what happens in Suicide Squad. That's what happens in Suicide Squad Hell to Pay, and that's kind of what happens in this. And that wasn't really in the comics. The earliest example I could find of that is Deadshot taking care of a young girl who ends up being his daughter, and I think it was in like 2005 story or something like that. But
And that was around the time where they were sort of bringing in Suicide Squad comics run and making these villains more sort of sympathetic anti-heroes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an interesting character that is kind of shifted tangentially in so many different media, and Arrow leans into that as well. But none of that is really present in season 1. Like he only shows up in, is it 2 episodes?
Yeah, 2 or 3, I think.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, still fairly minor.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we want to talk about in regards to season 1? Like obviously we have specific characters like Thea and, you know, Laurel Lance and so on, which we will get to
In
later.
future episodes.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of hard to talk about. There is one I do want to talk about because she appears in both season 1 and season 2.
Oh, yeah.
And that is Huntress.
Yep.
Who,
Another Batman character they kind of stole.
Yes, basically. And so Huntress in the show is the Earth 1 comic version, book version of Huntress, in the fact that she is the daughter of Bertinelli, the crime boss in, well, Gotham in the comics and Starling City here.
In Arrow, yeah.
Who would have thought? But yeah, who basically is seeking revenge against her dad for killing her fiance. And then in the show, they've gone and added a bit of a romance angle to it.
Yeah, which I don't think works, honestly. If I'm being honest, I never cared for Huntress in the show at
Fair
all.
enough.
Yeah, combination of the writing and the performance just kind of, I don't know. It is generally comic accurate when you talk about the Earth 1 version of it. The original version of Huntress is a whole other convoluted thing, which we don't really need to talk about. But yeah, beyond that, it's a fairly straightforward adaptation. I just don't think the character is that interesting, or they don't think they do a very good job with her at the very least. So
I think it could have worked if they either shortened the amount of time or gave her more time. I think because they had her around for about 3 episodes.
Yep.
And then came back again. And that wasn't enough time to properly develop into a fleshed out character, but it was too long to just have a one-dimensional character sort of. There was some nice stuff they did, especially with finally giving Oliver someone to talk to about the island and who has gone through similar things, and that whole I have to be a murderer kind of thing for justice versus revenge and stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, I feel they could have possibly done that with a better character.
Yeah, I mean, you still could have got a Huntress. I honestly just think you kind of needed to write the role a little better and recast it. I was never really a fan of the actress, so...
Well, now they have recast Huntress for the movie. Birds of Prey movie.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. The upcoming or already out Birds of Prey movie, depending on
when we can release this.
and when you're listening to this.
Yes.
Yeah, so...
which is Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who we will probably talk about a lot more in future episodes.
Yeah.
Because she is fantastic.
That is great casting.
Yes.
Side note, I'm actually really keen for that. Weird look in the short teaser we've only seen at this point, but still very exciting. Yeah, same with Cassandra Cain. That one actually bothers me, but that's another thing.
We'll get to that when the movie actually comes out.
Yes, we will. Okay, do we want to move into season 2 then?
Yes. What is probably regarded as the best season of Arrow.
It is the best season of Arrow. We can kind of unequivocally say that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, the majority of people seem to put it up. It gets the highest ratings on IMDb.
Yep.
It's the one that everyone raves about whenever you talk about Arrow.
Yeah, it's the one where it finally hit its stride. Like, we've already
Yes.
talked about this briefly, obviously, but like season 1 was still trying to figure itself out, but season 2 it knew exactly what it wanted to be, and it led immediately into this arc that it set up really well in season 1 and then pays off incredibly well at the end of season 2, and that is basically the establishment of the character Deathstroke in season 1. And then the main antagonist, who becomes the main antagonist in season 2.
Deathstroke!
So, yes, Deathstroke.
Sebastian Blood.
Yeah, so let's talk about Sebastian Blood first, right?
No,
yeah.
we must talk about Slade Wilson.
Yeah.
Played by the incredible Manu Bennett.
Yeah, who's Australian
Yes.
in the show. Like, he's part of the Australian Defence Force.
Well, the ASIS.
Yeah.
And that was entirely because they wanted to cast Manu Bennett. He went in for the audition. They went, oh, you're Australian. Do it with an Australian accent.
Yeah.
We'll make him Australian. Just put him out there.
Hell yeah, boy, and it so works. Yeah, if you can't tell at this point, we really like this version of
Yes.
Deathstroke. So
So we'll quickly give you a rundown of the season.
yeah, sure.
Season 2, present day, is the whole thing about
The aftermath of the undertaking.
Yes,
Yep.
the aftermath of the undertaking.
Yeah, 'cause basically
Oliver
the end of
Queen
season
left
1.
for a bit,
Yep.
and then comes back and finds that some people are like trying to recreate the vigilantism but getting it wrong. Other people have just doubled down on crime because Glades is a pure mess.
Yeah, because a
No
good
one seems
chunk
to
of
be
the city
supporting
was
it.
destroyed, and everyone's like, "Oh crap, things suck right now."
Yes.
Yeah.
So Oliver, basically, he's come to grips with the idea of, is he a murderer? Is he writing the sins of his father? Or is he actually trying to be a hero? And also dealing with the aftermath of Tommy's death, which send him that whole path of, am I a hero or am I a murderer? Which feeds in very nicely with, as it turns out, the main antagonist of...
Antagonize.
Well, there were essentially, in the present day story, 3 main antagonists.
Yeah.
That is Slade Wilson,
The big bad,
the
obviously.
big bad, Sebastian Blood,
Yep.
his right-hand man.
The underling bad.
Yes, and Isabel Rochev, who is also there.
Wait, who the hell is Isabel Roshek?
She is played by Summer Glau, and she is the one that is trying to take over Queen Consolidate.
Is that China? Oh, yeah. Damn, I completely forgot she existed as well.
Yeah, well, she doesn't really... She's not a villain of Green Arrow. She's a villain of Oliver Queen, as he's trying to be Oliver Queen,
That's right.
the runner of Queen Consolidated.
But she does still, like, kind of complete that, like, trio of the 3 antagonists in that respect. She's working, like, the 3 of them are obviously all
Yes.
working together, yeah.
And weirdly, she becomes Ravager for about 5 minutes at the end.
Yeah, sure, because why not?
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, damn, I completely forgot that she existed as well. Once again, it's a TV show. It's really hard to remember everything that happens in it, but,
Absolutely.
yeah, so if we want to go into the big thing, obviously, which is Deathstroke.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Who is played both in the present and the flashbacks by Manu Bennett.
Yep. Which is, I think, one of the biggest strengths about season 2 is that the flashbacks tie into each other so well.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact
Yeah.
they introduced him in season 1, they had the forethought to do that.
Yep. Clearly, like, see, this is my hypothesis about why season 2 is really good, is because they always knew where season 2 was going to go, which is why they had all that set up in season 1 until they could inevitably pay it off in season 2. And then it's in season 3 when things start to fall apart, because you can clearly tell, like, the thesis of the show had those first 2 seasons planned out, and then after that they start making up things as they go.
Well, there was also the fact that the original plan done by Greg Berlanti, who was sort of the main sort of... There was also... It was him, Mark Guggenheim, and Andrew Kroonsberg.
Yeah.
But Greg was the one that sort of took the reins to begin with, and he's the one that planned out the first 5 seasons.
Sure.
He then left at the end of season 2.
Yeah, see, there you go.
So you can kind of see where he had to go off and do the Flash.
Yep.
And
Which
that's...
means, hey, the Flash is great too. So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Led
So
to the
I'm
Flash.
very
being good.
glad that he did. But also, it kind of started the path of darkness where things just did not go right for Green Arrow.
The air of Guggy. Yeah, which we'll get to in later episodes, obviously.
Yes.
But, yeah, so, no, it's clear, like, Deathstroke is fairly, like a lot of the other antagonists, fairly different in this show than he is to the comics. In the comics, he's kind of similar to Deadshot, except maybe a more fleshed out version of Deadshot, and that he's generally just seen as like this big like hired gun, like an assassin basically, but the best of the best. Like Deathstroke in many respects is almost like a DC royalty, and then not only is he a really popular character, but he is considered like, you know, the greatest assassin in the world in so many respects. And he has had like emotive arcs and such, but he's never had like a real personal connection with Green Arrow throughout most of his history. He's generally just been an antagonist of the Teen Titans for the most part.
Yeah. Well, he started as an antagonist for the Teen Titans.
He's
Moved
gone
on-
out to Universal since
Yes.
then, but
He-
that's still where he's tied in.
So yeah, it was Teen Titans first, then he became Justice League enemy.
Yeah, true.
And
He's
then,
tangled with Batman as well a lot, obviously.
yeah, he's become now pretty synonymous with Batman, despite the fact that it's actually quite late in the run that they actually sort of
Yeah, that's true.
clashed.
But
Interestingly enough,
Honestly, it kind of he makes
Yeah.
sense as a Batman antagonist in so many ways. So,
but yeah, it was that link with the Justice League, that run where he was just up against the Justice League, where him and Green Arrow basically had any sort of comic book connection.
yeah, that's essentially it. So this whole new arc of him being on the island and being a friend of Oliver Queen, and then feeling betrayed by Oliver Queen and everything
And
like
then
that.
getting his superpowers on the island as well.
Yeah, from Mirakuru, which is also something that was created for the show. Like Mirakuru doesn't really exist in the comics. I mean,
Or in real life, unfortunately.
well, there is that too. Well, fortunately, in some respects.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of still like superhuman cocktails in the comics. Deathstroke gets his powers from, I think it was a military medical experiment or something
Yeah.
like that. When afterwards he can use 90% of his brain. Oh wow! And then gets like the usual super soldier cocktail of like enhanced strength and agility and speed and things like
Super
that.
reflexes.
Yeah, super reflexes. That's the only reason he has such incredible aim for a man with one eye.
Yes. The amazing healing factor that still just can't get his eye right.
yeah, there is that. Yeah, so all that jazz. But
Yes.
yeah, which
and also his high collection of toys, like his very powerful, it's like nth metal, steel, regenerative armor and sword and
yeah, sure. All the really fancy weapons he's working with, basically. Didn't he have
sci-fi.
Didn't he have the God Killer sword for a while as well?
I think so.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so really the major similarity between the two of them is both of them come from military backgrounds. Both are obviously like really hardened like soldiers in many respects, but that's kind of where the similarities end beyond
suit.
like and the suit obviously, but that's like much more of a visual reference
Aesthetic
than
thing,
anything plot wise. So yeah, in many ways he's kind of like fairly close to an original character, which is I think one of the reasons he works, honestly, that they had so much flexibility to do whatever they wanted with Deathstroke. So yeah, my only major criticism with him in the show is his motivation for why he hates Oliver so much. It kind of annoys me that he does all of this stuff to get revenge just because this one girl he died, which he kind of liked for a time or something. Honestly, it not only in that kind of a trite setup of once he discovers that Shadow is dead and Oliver was the one who let her die and so on, it's just really dull motivation. But what that motivation does, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it was a bad spark for motivation, but it sort of warped the whole thing of the Miracle who was playing with his head, him seeing hallucinations, and basically Shadow dying was sort of, he was then haunted by this other Shadow who really wasn't Shadow and a hallucination, and really just his dark side sort of come to fruition. So I feel it sort of fixed itself in a way, but it still didn't feel quite right having that.
The original thesis of the idea, I think, is a bit of a problem, but from what they did with that idea, I think, as you're saying, is like is good enough that I still obviously find him a fairly compelling character, and having such a personal connection to Oliver is really great as an antagonist too. Like, probably one of my favorite moments in the whole series is the end of season 2, when it's constantly cutting back between the fight with them on the island, on the Amazo, the ship, and modern day, and basically that contrast between those 2 points in both of their lives at the same time, I think is really entertaining and is one of the reasons why season 2 works so well. This is, out of any of the other seasons, this is the season where I feel like the flashbacks hands down work the best.
Yes.
More than any of the other seasons. So, because especially in later seasons, you can kind of tell that they clearly don't really know how to tie it into modern day and just don't really have a lot going on in them. But the flashbacks are integral to understand this season. So,
yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that mirroring that I found, like, just storytelling-wise, absolutely beautiful. We mentioned Shadow's death. While it wasn't that great, it did lead to a great moment in modern day where Slade Wilson tries to recreate that with Oliver and his mother and his sister.
Yeah.
And that sort of great moment where Moira actively chooses to sacrifice herself and sort of brings to the end of that climax while making Deathstroke look fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
Sorry for the language, but it's true.
Yeah. And Moaning Bennett is like really great.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a reason that they basically molded the character of him because he's great for the role. So
there's a great little story that he tells. You can probably find it on YouTube because he tells it better. But essentially, he thinks the reason that they picked him was because he accidentally choked out one of the assistants while auditioning.
I haven't heard this, but this sounds so accurate. I love it.
Basically, the opening scene where we meet Slade Wilson, he lands behind Oliver and gets him in a chokehold and gives a line. And the audition was that scene. And he sort of had to mime it, but he didn't feel right. And because he had done training with the Australian military and had like gone out on a few tours as sort of like part of the entertainment, part of the stuff like that, he had been trained a bit by those guys on how to properly do it. So he went, do you mind if someone's just there so I can actually properly get into character? And I went, sure. Just, they got one of the assistants in, and he puts him in the hole.
Get in here.
Puts him in the hole, reads the line. There's a bit of back and forth. He's waiting for the next line and realizes, he's starting to pass out. And let's go.
Oh, that's great. I haven't heard that before, but that seems so perfect, honestly. Yeah, so... No, he's real good, and he's really the main reason this season works so well. Everything to do with him, basically. Yeah. I
think also just as a whole, like, the way everything worked, I think this is like true drama TV. I think if you want to get it done, this is how you do it. You've got the forethought, you've got the good characters molded to the right actors, you have all these interweaving ideas that run through, even across, you base episode structures on themes rather than specific points. I think if you're writing a drama series, watch season 2 of Arrow.
And from what I recall, the least soap opera of all of the seasons. Coincidence that it's also the best? I think not.
Ooh. He says, knowing what comes next.
Well, yeah, I know. We're doing all of this with forethought, which is makes some things easier, but makes things much harder in other ways. So, if we want to talk about the other sort of secondary antagonist for Brother Blood, which I actually did remember was in this season, which was Brother Blood. The secondary antagonist under Deathstroke this season, which was Brother Blood. Yeah, once again, Brother Blood's an interesting one. That he's a fairly minor character in the comics. He was an antagonist of the Teen Titans as well, funnily enough, because he was the high priest of the Church of Blood, which worshipped the demon called Trigon, which is Raven's father, who's obviously a main member of the Teen Titans. So, as far as I'm aware, he's never tackled with Green Arrow before.
No. It's also another legacy title, so there's been a couple.
That's true. True.
None of them have really sort of escaped past Teen Titans.
Yeah,
getting Teen Titans.
Getting stepped on by Beast Boy or something. But so that, which makes for a fairly interesting choice for this season. But I think it kind of works. Once again, it's like as an original character, I think it does a pretty good job in that, once again, he's kind of that dark mirror to Oliver in a way that Slade isn't so much this season, but similar to what Malcolm Merlin was in season 1, where he clearly wants to save this city at the same time. And he's basically been corrupted by it. Like, funnily enough, which is actually really appropriate considering Brother Blood makes a deal with the devil in the comics and follows a demon. What Brother Blood does in the TV show is make a deal with the devil, i.e. Slade Wilson, to save the city, and then ends up getting stabbed in the back. Both figuratively and literally. Which is why he sacrifices himself at the end, because he realizes, much like Oliver, that even though he was trying to do a similar thing, he's clearly gone the wrong way about it. So, I think it works.
I also just love when I talk about this, because there's a whole bunch of Arrow-based comic books. So these are comic books set in the Arrow universe. There's one called Arrow Vengeance, and that sort of brings into light a bit more about Sebastian Blood. And specifically that he was actually part of the Church of Blood. He was brought in by Father Roger Trigon.
Wow, okay.
Yes, and also Cyrus Gold is there as well.
Yeah, sure.
Who we might want to talk about, but
Makes
there's
sense.
not. But again, that's one of those Easter egg
lip service. Yeah,
lip service ones.
For people who are interested, Cyrus Gold is Solomon Grundy in the comics, but in the show, he's literally just a brute who takes a bunch of Mirakuru. So,
and is the one person to sort of initially survive the Mirakuru.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and there are hints that he's possibly still alive.
Yeah,
zombie, but that never comes up again.
No, not really. Once again, it's kind of a lip service thing.
Yeah, and so there's a whole bunch of references to Teen Titans in the comics.
Yeah, wow.
But unfortunately, none of that's in the TV show, so no real point in bringing that up.
No, it's still an interesting point to make.
Yes.
So, yeah, once again, it just kind of fits into that similar theme of like changing characters quite drastically while still maintaining the name. And yeah, I think this one in this case works fairly well. So, yeah. Is there anything else, any other characters in particular you want to talk about in season 2? Or, yeah, I mean, we still haven't hit on like some of the major characters like Moira and Thea and Oliver and all that, but they kind of like, it's a little bit difficult to talk about some of their arcs depending on what characters they become later in the series.
We can talk about Moira, given that
Oh yeah, that's true.
her arc
She's
doesn't
dead.
last. Yeah, she's dead.
Yeah.
But yeah, also is in the comics, but also is an invention of the show. It's both. Not because of that, the fact that Moira was never fleshed out really in the comics, and half the time is usually dead before her Oliver Queen fully embraces being Green Arrow.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, like there's a whole lot of different continuities, and in all of them there are different things, but it always seems to focus more on Robert Queen, who's the father, which this show sort of did with his sort of death and all his secrets.
Though they still do give Moira quite a bit to do in these first couple of seasons.
Yes,
So,
and she is really quite good, I do feel. Very much leaned into the more soap opera side of things.
Yeah.
But adds that sort of air of mystery, especially with season 1 and dealing with the undertaking and actually being part of it. And there's a nice little act of conflict in season 2 where she's being put on trial by Laurel Lance for her role in the undertaking.
Yeah, she does bring a nice level of moral ambiguity in many respects, and that especially in season 1 they really play up the mystery of like, is she helping Oliver, is she helping Mel, and what's exactly going on, and so on and so forth. So I think that's fine, but once again, she's kind of one of those characters, also like Laurel Lance in the first couple of seasons, that really just leans into the soap opera elements, which is not only the stuff that I don't like, but the stuff that I forget about. So.
But there are, I think, especially even in season 2, you know, when the show did find its personality, Moira Queen as a character also found, I think, sort of the proper.
Yeah, she has an apt
Place.
resolution. Yeah, dying at the hand of Destro like that is not only a good emotional moment for Oliver, but it also kind of makes sense for her arc as well. I think,
especially before she reveals that she did know Oliver, or has come to realize Oliver is the Arrow. And sacrifices herself by having the courage to actually finally stand up to the bad guy, which she couldn't do all this time before, and led to all this pain throughout season 2.
Yeah.
So it was a nice little end to a character arc. And
I think it was smart as well, honestly, because it really feels like a character that they could have kept around but would have ran out of things for her to do in so many respects.
Absolutely.
Which they have done with other characters in the show, and it just kind of becomes dead weight at that point. So I think, especially while Greg Berlanti was clearly still on the crew, that was a smart way to end it with her at that point. So yeah.
There's and there was that nice little mirror of Shadow, Sarah, and Moira Thea sort of flashback, and then having that end differently to how the first one did, which sort of throws everything off, and it was nice. I just found it was a nice moment.
Yeah. I think that's a fairly effective moment, honestly. It works.
There's a lot of talks about whether that was sort of a fridging moment. For those who don't know, we've brought it up in a podcast episode beforehand, but if for some reason this is the first episode you're listening to, go back. But yeah, no, fridging basically is when a female character dies offhandedly, usually by a villain, just to add to the emotional story of the male protagonist.
Yeah, basically to give the male protagonist motivation. Yeah, the term comes from a Green Lantern comic, I believe, isn't it? Where Green Lantern basically finds out one of his antagonists has murdered his wife and stuffed her into a fridge. Yep. Which is where the term comes from. Yeah, so in some respects I think it does, but I also think it had enough story stuff going on that there's a little bit more than that. I mean, that being said, this show still definitely fridges other characters. Yes. Like Shadow, the reason that she bothers me so much is that it's very much a fridging moment, which is frustrating. Yeah, Moira not so much.
Whenever people talk about fridging, I'm like, I feel there's good ways you can do it and bad ways you can do it, and Arrow does the best of both. As in, shows the best way to fridge a character in Moira Queen, her stand up for herself, it coming at a nice end to the character arc, and still going down with dignity. Yep. And then Shadow and future deaths in the series, where they do the worst.
Yeah, absolutely the worst.
The goddamn worst.
Yeah, goddamn.
Shadow wasn't as bad as what comes, but it's still
it's still not great. That's still the one thing that really bothers me about season 2. So yeah. It's briefly actually, there's probably another villain we can talk about. This is an antagonist I do remember from the flashbacks in season 2. Dr. Anthony Ivo.
Yes.
Yeah, so he basically...
Unfortunately doesn't have a robot in this one.
No.
But also probably a good thing.
Disappointingly so. Yeah, so he's basically the guy who shows up on the island looking for the Miracle, everything like that. In the comics, once again, it's kind of those lip services thing. Dr. Anthony Ivo is a scientist who creates this robot called an Amazo, which is a Justice League antagonist, which is a robot which can basically duplicate the superpowers of any hero that he comes across. Who's a really, not major antagonist, but a powerful antagonist at the very least. But obviously there's no real reference to him making robots in this. The closest thing is his ship at the end of the season is called the Amazo. Once again, just lip service, though. Though I think he serves his purpose on the island at the very least. He, in many respects, is even a secondary character in the flashbacks, in that Slade is obviously the main antagonist there as well. So
And luckily we do eventually get an Amazo robot, just not on Arrow, and not until season 7.
Yeah, that's true. But that's another thing. Yeah, so are there any other specific characters or points you want to talk about in season 2? Or I mean, there's obviously still plenty of other stuff going on.
Yeah. We mentioned Isabel, but honestly, in that, we've basically said all there is. She does take the name Ravager, which is another major character in the comics for a name, but very much just lip service in the show.
Yeah, okay.
Ravager is the son of Deathstroke in the comics.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Jericho.
of course. Yep.
Who appears later on in season 6.
Yeah, true. Which we will get to once again eventually. Yeah, I will have to finish season 6 at some point. Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, it seems like if we're going to talk broadly about season 1 or 2 of the show, this is, in many, especially in hindsight, looking back and seeing where we know Arrow goes after this, season 2 does really feel like the pinnacle in many respects. But both seasons are also very interesting as an adaptation, as we've kind of been touching on throughout this whole thing, in that it's very much not slavish to the original comics at all. And in the worst cases, it takes literally just a name. But in the best cases, it takes a name and a basic premise and then adapts it more so to the show. And I think, especially with a character like Green Arrow, and especially on a show like Arrow, I think being too slavish to the original can just basically make for a weaker project than otherwise could be the case. And we have seen that in other shows which try to be too faithful to the source material, that they basically get shackled into these are the things that are going to happen. This still even kind of happens in Arrow, and then the moment you name a character something like Laurel Lance or something, you know she's going to become Black Canary down the line or something like that. But they play with those expectations in a level that I think is interesting, and a lot of comic book shows do that in so many ways, that they have to rejig characters and stories and all that just to keep fans who are so familiar with the original source material guessing. And I think Arrow is one of the better versions of that, at least in the first couple of seasons.
Yeah, especially you brought up Black Canary, who is in the comics Laurel Lance and has always been either Laurel Lance or Dinah Drake. And in the show, you know she's eventually going to become Black Canary, but surprise, there's a canary already.
Whoa!
And it's Sarah.
Whoa!
So I think that's one of the ways that they've certainly improved, again, keeping people guessing. And yeah, every adaptation has to be in some way linked to what they're adapting. It's just what they choose to adapt can make or break it.
Yeah, sure.
In this case, it was done pretty damn well.
Pretty well. For the first 2 seasons. Yeah. Let's, I mean, as much as the next 2 episodes are going to be very interesting, I don't know if it's going to be quite so reverential.
No.
Yeah. Shall we move into Do It Differently then?
All right. Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Nailed it.
Arrow.
Okay. Shall I go first this week? This episode?
Sure,
yeah, sure. So mine is fairly straightforward. It's one of those things where it's more of a basic conceptual level. I would want to change the show just to take it in a fairly different direction. And what I want to change for Arrow is basically you can sort of maintain a similar showrunners and cast and things like that, but just change the channel that it's on from the CW to HBO. Basically, I want a really hard R version of Green Arrow, and then it really leans into a lot of the violence and, the things that HBO was basically renowned for that CW doesn't really do. I think it would be a really great way of toning down the attractive people having attractive people problem and less soap opera-ness. And I really think even if you keep the main ideas of the show intact and it's still a fairly loose adaptation and things like that, I think it would make for just a better version of the show in many respects. I just kind of wanted to get rid of my worst element of it, obviously, and putting it on HBO and making it more adult-oriented, I think was the best way to go about it. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
There you go.
more beheadings in Green Arrow.
Exactly. But imagine, like, so many stabbings. We get to see so many people stuck through with arrows. It would be great. Yeah. Hopefully no incest, though. You know, you can never be sure with HBO, though.
They almost went there with the CW as well.
Did they? When?
With the flirting between Thea and Tommy.
Oh, God. Yeah. Oh,
In
no.
the first season, and then second season reveal,
Oh,
they share a father.
No, I forgot about that. Oh, see, actually, well, that makes my pitch even better. It's already there. Just lean into it. Pull a Jon Snow. Why not? All right. What about you?
Okay, I have less and more.
Okay.
I feel I'm not going for anything major because one, I feel, especially with the first season, because they had planned it out fully and they had everything all very connected. It's kind of hard if you pull on one strand that's not as good. You can affect a strand that's really well, and then you sort of. It's kind of hard to.
Well, welcome to serialized storytelling, people.
Yeah, so it's very hard to sort of talk about in a way. So I'm trying to fix up some storyline things for this first and second season. But again, I really like the second season so much, and first season is pretty damn good. So there's not a whole lot that I'd actually want to change.
Yeah, okay.
So when it comes to season 1, I'm not going to have a whole lot to talk because it is still very much setting the groundwork. For it. So it's basically essentially going to remain the same, except there's going to be a bit clearer, I feel, for starters, on if Arrow is just straight up killing every thug he sees, or if it's actually just killing the people who he doesn't give a second chance to, or it kind of got messy, because that's one of the crux of season 2 is he a murderer or is he a hero?
Yep.
And the fact that he's like, I must stop killing. I'm like, well, watching the first season again, he either doesn't do a whole lot of killing to begin with, or he's murdering
He's very explicit about
very
it.
explicit and killing everyone he sees.
Yeah, okay.
And they don't make that clear. Because some it's like, oh yeah, you've left all these bodyguards hospitalized and left a wanted hunt. And then later seasons is like, I killed all those people. Like, did you? So that's, make that clear.
Okay, fair.
That's my main one gripe with season 1. Oh, and also figure out what you're doing with Felicity early on. We didn't talk Felicity much in this. She is one of the newer characters that was introduced. Yeah,
we'll delve into her much more heavily in next episode.
When her character actually becomes a bit more fleshed out.
Yep. Well, she becomes more of a main player, yeah. Fleshed out is another thing.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
I didn't want to spoil
deep breaths.
So
yeah,
I'm getting worked up here. But work out what the hell you're doing with her, because there's the story that she was just meant to be for one episode, and then they
liked her so much.
Audience liked her so much, and the characters liked her so much that they kept her on.
Yeah,
I don't believe that.
Really?
Because she was. They say we saw the first episode, and then she was there for the next 3. Or something like that.
Schedules
and then went away and then came back for shortly. And knowing how TV production works, those episodes would have been done long before they actually got aired.
Yeah, okay. That sounds like a rumor spread by shippers, I would wager.
Possibly, or just people trying to justify why Felicity...
Why she became such a major player?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even in the first 2 seasons, I did like her. Found her a little annoying, but was nice comic relief. I would... so season 1, I'd actually work out, is she just helping Walter? Is she just there because of him? Or is she planning on staying for the whole thing? Make her story a bit stronger. And I'd probably do that by introducing her the same way, waiting a little bit, and then having just the first interaction with Oliver the same, but then purely start working with Walter.
Okay.
And then when those sort of Arrow-Walter storylines converge, that's when you have a... start actively seeing helping Green Arrow, and then later on, at near the very end of the season, actually have her become part of the team.
Sure, okay.
In the same way that Laurel was helping Green Arrow without actually knowing it was Oliver Queen. Yeah, also make Oliver better at lying. That's his whole shtick. And true. Whenever he's doing it with Felicity, it is just the worst.
Yeah, it's very true.
So yes, that's my main 2 things I'd probably say for season 1.
Okay.
Season 2, despite it being the better season, I found some actual things that I can properly talk about.
Ooh.
Because they're story arcs that that can be changed without directly affecting everything else around them. Mm-hmm. So my very first one is the story arc of Laurel Lance. In the main show, she has a drinking problem that comes out because of a mixture of all things and attractive people problems.
Yeah. PTSD meets attractive people problems.
Yes, meets a drinking problem.
Yep. That was the start of my drinking problem.
Basically, I would, for starters, don't give her a drinking problem.
Sure.
Basically, we lose the drinking problem, and her whole story arc begins with still feeling that grief for Tommy. Like, straight from the beginning, as soon as Oliver meets her, she's like, doesn't know how to connect. She has that whole thing of like, I feel I betrayed him, and then he died, and now I don't know. I feel he died without me knowing how I truly feel about him, and him being mad at me or something. And she's just like, and also actual properly suffering from a bit of PTSD from being right in the heart of the undertaking.
Sure.
So that is her sort of issue. And because of, she's then trying to balance that with her new role as the assistant to the DA, and the DA currently putting Moira on trial, trying to get the death penalty. So she's trying to work out, okay, I'm trying to do good for my job, but I'm also, that's my best friend's mother that's on trial. So she's balancing that and at the same time dealing with all the stuff. And that's makes her push away other people, try and stick in the world. And eventually, one by one, everyone sort of starts leaving her because she's trying to alienate. The only person that's really sticking around is Oliver and Quentin. And even then, Quentin is sort of trying to deal with his own issues. That whole series of him being a demoted cop, and is he still sort of now a friend of the vigilante, or is he trying to still stick with justice?
Yeah, okay.
And you can sort of change that a bit to sort of fit in better with this story. And basically, she, instead of the drinking problem, she just gets framed by Sebastian Blood. And there's a lot more of, because the whole season, there's a whole lot of links between Sebastian and Laurel. And she's like, he's definitely part of it. And they're like, no, he isn't. Don't be silly. And Oliver's like, nah, he's my friend. Why would he do that? And then, surprise, she was right. I'd actually have more of an antagonistic relationship. Like, everyone else still sees him as the bad guy, but he's clearly more of an antagonist to Laurel than he is antagonist to Arrow.
Sure.
While still doing the whole man in the skull mask routine. And I wouldn't have Oliver have a go at her for being suspicious about Blood. Their sort of fracture occurs when Sarah is back in the mix. So that point where they have the welcome party and Laurel sees Oliver and Sarah getting all lovey-dovey, and she's like, oh, holy crap, I'm now having flashbacks to when I found out that Sarah was dead and it was kind of your fault and all that stuff from season 1. And she was like, I don't know how to deal with all this again. And it's just really just amps her on. She goes into a proper depression. She pushes everything away until eventually, like in the actual story, it sort of starts resolving. She ends up letting Oliver in. She finds out he's a vigilante and just hugs him. Because like, why are you helping all these people? And I thought I knew you, but I didn't, but I do, in that weird way. Where it's like, well, you were a dick, but you were doing it for this good reason because I knew at heart you were a good person.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's her sort of storyline. That's the main sort of plot I would sort of change of season 2. Along with, I have many thoughts.
Oh boy.
Sorry. The other main thing in season 2 is also just Ivo. Make him more of an actual antagonist.
Oh, really?
Maybe, yeah, I feel, because he manages to get the upper hand of these like elite people just by being there at the right place at the right time.
It's kind of true. Yeah.
I'd give him a reason to actually do that, and maybe have some of his experiments actually mean he can hold his own
okay.
against them. Not like he's been...
Give him a robot?
Not necessarily a robot, but give him tech. Give him something that can make he can go up against these like Slade Wilson and Shadow, who are these definitive fighters.
Yeah, okay, make him more of a physical threat, basically.
Yes,
yeah,
basically. Okay. And mainly do that so when we have the death of Shadow, that's done differently. Instead, it's them fighting, and Iroh's about to kill Sarah, and there's an injured Oliver. He then saves Sarah, but quickly turns around. Shadow takes him down, destroys some of his tech, so he has to retreat, but in the last minute shoots her, and so she's given like an actual sacrifice where she's basically saved the lives of Sarah and Oliver, and has a bit more dignity to it.
That would be nice.
Yeah. And then you can still then have Slade freak out because of his miracle and induced hallucination, thinking, oh yeah, in his head, Oliver just straight up pointed a gun at Shadow and shot her, whereas we clearly know that didn't happen. And so it's more clear that it's not that specific event that's causing his motivation, but how messed up his head is.
Okay, so
because of
lean
me.
more on the Mirakuru per
Yes.
se than the actual initial motivation.
And basically him just going, okay, that's a trigger. I'm insane now.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So those are the main two things. Oh, and also Isabel doesn't become Ravager, and she isn't like a woman scorned, because I think they briefly gave her mentioned that she had an affair with Robert Queen or something.
I barely remember that either, yeah.
Yeah, just cut that out.
Okay, sure.
She is just working with Slade, trying to take over the company, just as Isabel. That's it. Oh, and Oliver doesn't end up on Hong Kong.
Really?
No.
No. Okay.
I want him to stay on the island for 5 years.
So you would change the whole, basically, where all the flashbacks go in later seasons? Yeah, okay. I can kind of see that.
Well, it doesn't change a whole lot, because he's only on Hong Kong for a year.
Yeah, I know, but he's off the island to, outside of that as well, isn't he? In season 4?
Yeah. Season 4 he comes back
Oh,
to the island, and then season 5 he sort of jumps between the island and Russia.
That's right. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
So yeah,
sure.
I would have the full 5 seasons on the island,
Okay, cool. Fair enough.
but a bigger island, just so we can actually make sense.
So more stuff to do.
Yes.
Fill in his mini-map. No,
So
fair
yeah,
enough.
that is my do it differently.
Cool. No, fair
I'm
enough.
sorry it was a bit all over the place, but it's kind of hard when you grab one thread and you're trying to work your way through it without destroying everything else.
Well, that's kind of how serialized storytelling working. Narrative built on narrative and so on and so forth. So, yeah. No, it's very true.
I promise they'll be better in future in the next two coming so I can properly get into it.
We can't promise Arrow is going to be better in future episodes, but...
But mine do it differently. I'm more confident with.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, sure. Oh, do we want to move into what we're recommending this week then? This episode?
Sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, just to bookend this episode.
Yeah.
What have you got for us?
Well, I sort of wanted to keep with the Green Arrow theme, and I was going to recommend the main inspirations for the show.
Batman Begins?
No. Green Arrow Year One. It's a graphic novel. It's about Oliver's time on the island, and it's very much what they do with the flashbacks, in that, he's not just on the island, he is just surviving, he's also dealing with, in the comics, drug dealers and China White. And so I reckon if you're a fan of Arrow the show, read Green Arrow Year One. It's written and drawn by Andy Diggle and Jock, who are two great comic book aficionados.
I think I know the names. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Diggle.
Well, yeah, no,
gets
obviously.
used
No, I
as
mean
the name.
Andy Diggle, but yeah.
Yes, they've done some great stuff, and I highly recommend Green Arrow Year One.
Cool. No, fair enough. Yeah, I haven't actually read that one myself, so I might have to get to it at some point. Yeah, do you have a copy?
I do, signed by Stephen Amell and Alan Tudyk.
That's right, and you were going to get another copy, weren't you?
Yes,
just so you could actually read it.
Yes.
Yep, it's the whole thing. Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, this episode, I'm actually going to change things up and not recommend a weird, obscure movie that I've seen recently.
Oh.
Even if I could do that in many respects. For on a personal note, I did actually just start working my PhD, which means I'm watching a lot of random world cinema films, which are actually really good, but that's a whole other thing. No, this episode, I want to recommend a video game from a developer of an adaptation we have talked about previously. By Insomnia. Yeah, the only Insomnia game I've been able to play, because it's the only one on PC, but Sunset Overdrive was just released on Steam a little while ago. Have you played, do you know Sunset Overdrive?
I know it, I haven't played it.
Oh, okay, it's really good. It's, the best way to describe it is it's an open world action game, action shooter essentially, but you play as basically parkour Jesus. And that you can do whatever you want. You can grind on rails or bounce on cars or like climb on walls and everything like that. Like it's kind of an interesting movement precursor to their Spider-Man game later down the road. Wait, did I call them Insomnia before? Insomniac.
Insomniac.
Yes, sorry, my mistake. But so it takes place in this place called Sunset City when the awesome apocalypse happens. That they literally call the awesome apocalypse in game, where a bunch of this new sports drink called Overdrive gets launched, but it turns out that it's still experimental, and anyone who drinks it turns into a raving mutant. And so the whole city gets overrun, and you basically play as this unnamed protagonist who has to go through and save it all. It's like plot-wise and like stylist-wise, it's really kind of stupid. Like it's very self-aware and indulgent and a little bit obnoxious. I think that kind of bothers me, but the gameplay itself is just so solid. Like the movement feels so good, And it's always just, I've been using it as a great stress relief, and then I'll just play an hour here, an hour there, just do a couple of missions, because it's really great to jump in and out of, and always just feels really strong and solid, and just a really entertaining open world game that doesn't take itself too seriously. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe the game did very well when it was released, and considering how good it is, I really think it deserves more of a following, because this is, at least I really enjoy it. Not as anything special, particularly like artistically wise or anything, but it's just a really solid combination of mechanics that works well together that just feels great. So yeah, I would recommend it, especially considering how much you like Insomniac. I feel like this is a game you would really enjoy.
I'm sure to pick it up.
Yeah.
I've actually just picked up recently a game by another studio that we've previously talked about on this podcast.
Oh, really?
Just Cause 4.
Oh, yeah, righto. How is it? I've heard mixed things.
I've only just sort of begun.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to say at this point. At the moment, I think I'm preferring Just Cause 3.
Yeah, okay.
So anyone listening to the podcast, if you like just blowing stuff up and living in an action movie, get Just Cause 3.
Yeah, it is the Michael Bay franchise of video games.
Absolutely.
But more tolerable. Still vaguely misogynistic, but more tolerable.
And Rico Rodriguez as a protagonist is a lot better than some of the planned white dummies.
Yeah. He's still kind of... Can you really call him a protagonist?
He's the embodiment of chaos.
Yeah, he's kind of just an accent with a grappling hook.
Yeah,
in many respects. Which, I mean, works fine for the games.
And is still somehow better than most Michael Bay
yeah, okay,
protagonists.
You've got me there. They're not petulant man-childs who are really insecure masculinity.
But I'm sure to bring up Just Cause 4 again in our random talk future when I've probably had a chance to play it.
Yeah, fair enough. I am actually curious to see what you think about it, because I've played Just Cause 2 and 3, which I enjoy purely on a surface blowing up level, but I think they're fine. But Just Cause 4 I've heard pretty mixed things about, and I know a lot of people are fairly down on it, so I'd be curious to see what you think, considering how much of a fan of the franchise you are. Yeah. Oh, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send in, I don't know, your Arrow fanfic or something like that if you want. I'll read it. Honestly, it depends on what your Arrow fanfic is about. I'm sure there's some really great stuff out there, but you say Arrow fanfiction and a lot of really negative stuff comes into my head, which we'll be getting into in the next episode and episode after that. So yeah, stick around for that. It should make for very interesting episodes. This, I think, is our longest episode so far as well, so...
Yeah, well, we kind of expected that.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to happen for TV shows, because this is the first TV show we've done, isn't it? Yeah. And is almost certainly not going to be the last as well, but there's always so much more to talk about when you're literally talking about more content. So yeah, no, it should be great. So until next time, fare thee well.
Bye.